Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. Chicago brings its Rock and Roll Hall of Fame horn section to MGM National Harbor this Friday. I spoke with guitarist Keith Howland about the band's biggest hits, including 25 or 6 to 4, Hard to Say I'm Sorry, and You're the Inspiration. Hey, Keith, thanks so much for joining us here on WTOP.
Hey, man, it's great to be here. I got to say, WTOP was probably the first radio station I became aware of as a young child because I was born right there in Silver Spring. And yeah, I remember my dad always listening to WTOP.
I had no idea you were a local guy. So real quick, memory, tell me about growing up in Silver Spring. You know, what high school?
Well, actually, I left before high school. I was there probably for 12 years. I went to I originally lived on a street called Arvin Street right there in I guess Silver Spring, and then we wound up in a neighborhood called Stonegate, and I went to Stonegate Elementary. But the things I remember more about that sort of DC area was Wheaton Music Center, which is where I got my first guitar, which is a little music shop in Wheaton, Maryland. And then Chuck Levin's, Washington Music Center right there, the big one, was where I got most of my, my first Les Paul I got there, my first Marshall I bought there. And actually, when we go there, I think I'm going to cruise over to Washington Music Center just to kind of, for nostalgia purposes, and just check it out, because it's been a long time since I've been in there. And I'm sure actually probably some of the same salesmen are still there from 40 years ago. So it's a family run business, so I might go check it out.
Oh, you should definitely do the old nostalgia tour while you're here, for sure. Well, we're talking because Chicago, the hit Rock and Roll Hall of Fame band Chicago is coming to MGM National Harbor on October 8th. What can we expect from the show? I assume it's all the hits, and I guess the second part of that, it's got to be exciting to be back touring again after the last year and a half of COVID stuff.
Yeah, you know what? It's pretty cool because we started, I think our first show was on June 20th, and we started with the big outdoor venues, kind of up and around New York, New Jersey. We were at Jones Beach and PNC and Garden State Arts Center and some of those different venues. And we were literally, for like the first week of our tour, the first 6 or 7 shows were the first show those venues had back since COVID shut them down. So it was a really kind of a cool, because you could tell the audiences were really into being back, seeing live music, but also just being the first band in each one of those venues was really a cool thing. So, and we're doing a full, it's Chicago and their greatest hits. We're doing, it's over 2 hours of music with a 20-minute intermission. So, we're pretty much hitting every nail on the head, so to speak.
Oh, well, with the number of hits Chicago had, I mean, it's not hard to put together, a couple hours of music. That's easy. Well, cool. Well, so, I mean, you mentioned growing up in Silver Spring. Were you a big fan? Because obviously you didn't join Chicago till what, like 1995 or something like that. Were you a fan, growing up as a kid or anything of Chicago's early stuff?
Absolutely. I distinctly remember my older brother, who's 4 years older than I am. He's a drummer, and he was taking drum lessons, I think, at Wheaton Music. And his drum instructor sent him home with transcriptions of Danny Seraphine's drum parts from Chicago 2, the second album. And so he brought home that album because he was going to learn all the drum parts. And, I had heard, does anybody really know what time it is? And maybe Beginnings on the radio a couple times, probably on WTOP. But he brought that record home, and we sat in his bedroom. he bought it in quadraphonic stereo, so he had the 4 speakers, quadraphonic, which is so it's like surround sound. And we just sat in the middle of the room and listened to that whole album. And I remember we were blown away. We'd never heard anything like it. And so our parents started facilitating us going to Chicago concerts. Funny story, my first Chicago concert was, I think, 1975 at the Capitol Center there in D.C. And Terry Kath was still alive, and so it was the original lineup. And so we go to the concert, and we're sitting there, and about halfway into the concert, I'm scratching my face, and I'm itching. And the people in the row in front of us, this was back in the days when people actually would pass a joint around at a concert. And, the pot smoke was coming up and like hitting me in the face. And I was, 10 years old, 8 or 9 years old. And by the time the concert was over, my whole face was swollen, red, itchy. And my mother said to me, now let that be a lesson to you. Never smoke marijuana because you're allergic to it, obviously. Well, I proved that theory wrong when I got into college, but I'd gotten into some poison ivy in the woods behind our house prior to the concert and gotten it on my face. So I thought that was kind of a funny thing. She used that as a deterrent to smoking marijuana.
So a memorable first Chicago show.
And through all that, though, they were unbelievable, and Terry Kath was amazing, and to sort of extend that story as far as my upbringings in the DC area, we most of the concerts I saw in the DC area were at Merriweather Post Pavilion. I saw the Carpenters there. I saw the Doobie Brothers. I saw Santana. I saw Bryan Adams. I saw, all these different groups. And my first year with the band in '95, we played Merriweather Post Pavilion. And obviously I saw Chicago there several times. And that was kind of a trip to have sort of come full circle and be in the backstage area with my family in the audience at Merriweather Post, taking the stage with the band that I grew up going to see, at the very same venue. So that was kind of a pinch me moment.
That is wild. Like you said, you literally went to Merriweather, this institution in this area, to see Chicago, and not knowing, your kid eyes, not knowing that you would be standing on that same stage with that same band at that same venue. That's a great full circle moment. Well, cool. Well, we sort of went into, your earliest experiences with the band, but if you could, just through your fellow band members, maybe telling you the story, passing down the info, remind us how did the band actually form in Chicago back in the day? I guess it was like 67, I think.
Yeah, I'm pretty much privy to that story. They were all the horn guys were students at DePaul University, and trying to remember, Terry Kath, Danny Seraphin, and Walt Parazater were in a band together, and they actually toured, I believe, with like a Dick Clark, some type of Dick Clark review, some type of show when they were teenagers. And then Walt decided that he thought it would be a good idea to put together a rock and roll band with horns. And originally Terry Kath was actually playing bass guitar, but he switched over to guitar, and I think Walt recruited Jimmy Pankow and Lee Loughnane from his buddies at DePaul to form the horn section. And then and Danny was there. Peter Cetera came in a little bit late in the game. They found Robert Lamb. Robert Lamb came in. They auditioned him. He came in with a whole notebook full of song lyrics, and so Robert already had a bunch of songs written. So they thought that was cool. And so originally it was the six guys, and Robert was playing Hammond organ and actually playing the bass notes with his feet, kicking bass pedals. And then they decided, well, we need to find a bass player. So there was a rival band in the Chicago area called, oh gosh, I can't remember what the name of the thing was, because they called themselves the Big Thing. And then Peter was in a different group, and I can't remember the name of it, but they went and saw him and they recruited him, and he jumped ship and joined them. Big, huge bonus though was they got a bass player that could sing his butt off. I mean, Cetera's voice was like, when they heard him sing, the high tenor thing, that just rounded out the whole ball of wax for the group. And so they started playing clubs around Chicago, and mostly they were kind of a, I don't want to call them a supper club band, but they were like they were wearing suits and ties and doing like choreographed dance moves and playing like Motown, and they were writing their own material, but they would try to sneak the songs in, and the club owners would come down on them and say, like, you can't play that original music, you got to stick to the stuff that makes the people dance. So they kind of stuck to the story. And then as Jimmy told me, when Sgt. Pepper's came out, the Beatles record, they all dropped acid and listened to Sgt. Pepper's, and the very next day they declared, forget this, we're not doing these cover tunes anymore. We're going to do our own thing. I think Terry Kath literally like ripped his suit off on stage, as legend has it. And they did the entire night of nothing but their original material. And the club owner came up and tried to shut them down. And apparently Robert Lamb dove off the stage and jumped on the guy and started like a fist fight.
A fist
And they,
fight?
of course, they were fired. So then, at that point, they went forward. We are a legitimate original music rock band, and that's all we're going to do. And they got discovered by I guess it was Jim Guercio. I think it was either Jim Guercio or Clive Davis. I think it was Guercio who brought him out to LA, and then they started playing at the Whiskey, every week, and building a following. And then Jimi Hendrix came in and heard them and invited them to come on the road with him to open the show.
Oh, they opened for Hendrix on the road? I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, that was kind of the big exposure moment. They hadn't even, I don't even think they'd released their first album yet, and Hendrix took them on the road. So they opened for Hendrix, and that got them a lot of exposure. In the really early days, Chicago was like, they were considered sort of a kind of an underground prog rock, the college kids loved them, because they were sort of edgy and political and proggy and, not mainstream.
Right.
So, so that's kind of how that all got going. And then, the rest is history. Really wasn't until the second album though that they broke huge, which was when "Make Me Smile" came out as a single. They had moderate success with the hits from the first album, but when "Make Me Smile" became such a huge song, the Columbia Records re-released Beginnings, Does Anybody Really Know What Time It Is, Question 67 and 68, and then those songs became even bigger because of the the pull of "Make Me Smile."
Wow. Thanks for taking me through that whole formation evolution. And I didn't know they opened for Hendrix. I didn't know they got kicked out of the club and jumped off the stage in the fist fight. That's gold. Thanks, man. Cool. Well, you brought us to the point where where Chicago is signed, and let's run through some of the hits. How about, does anybody really know what time it is? You said that was one of the first ones you remember hearing as a kid, but man, what do you think makes that song work?
Well, one of the magical things about it was that literally is the very first song that the band recorded in the studio. So these guys were basically just kids, teenagers. I think Jimmy must have been probably 18 maybe when they cut that song, because he's the youngest of the original four. Well, the original Danny was younger than Danny might have been 17. But anyway, so that was a song that Robert had that was kind of an intact song, I guess, that he brought to the band. And that was the very first song they cut when they went into Columbia Studios in New York City. And they were like deer in the headlights, as they have told me, that they were like, it was all new to them. They were in the city and they were in the studio and they'd never been in the studio. And, the red light came on and, that was a 8-track recording. So there wasn't a lot of room for error. In other words, not 8-track like the one that goes in your car, but like 8-track tape machine. In other words, you had 8 tracks of recording to get your song together. The Beatles did a lot of their stuff on 4-track, which is even harder. Now you can have unlimited tracks with Pro Tools because it's all digital, so you can have 100 tracks of information. So in other words, they had to commit to drum sounds, horn sounds, because once it was recorded, a lot of stuff was already pre-mixed, to make it all fit on that 8-track tape recorder. But yeah, I mean, that song, we play it every night. I've probably played it 2,500 times now, if not more, with the band. And it never gets old. It never gets tired. People always like it. I still like playing it. There's something about that sort of swing feel that it has that I just think I don't know. People actually get up and dance to that one.
25 or 6 to 4. I love that song. I think it's one of the coolest songs ever. But solve the argument over what the title means. Is it literally just 25 or 26 minutes to 4 o'clock? Is that what it is?
That's exactly what it is. If you read the lyric, Robert Lamb was sitting in his apartment, I believe, in New York City, and he was trying to write a song. So he was waiting for the break of day, searching for something to say, flashing lights against the sky. That would be New York. Giving up, I close my eyes, sitting cross-legged on the floor. What is it, 25 or 6 minutes to 4 in the morning is basically what that was. So it's a song about writing a song, and it's getting really late, and he feels like he's kind of stuck and has nothing to say. So what he found to say was that he was writing a song and he was stuck. And that became, and the time of day it was when he was feeling sort of stuck. And the funny,
Go ahead.
yeah, I mean, a lot of people think, oh well, it's the formula for acid, or it's some drug reference, and it's as simple as that. And just goes to show you that you just never know what. I kind of liken it a little bit to like I heard on the radio just the other day Phil Collins' song "Susudio."
Oh yeah.
Right. So the story behind that is that Phil was writing this song, and when he got to the chorus, he just sang something that sounded phonetically interesting. Studio, and he was like, I'll change that later and put something reel in there that makes sense, And once he finished the song, he was kind of like, well, I kind of like that. It's almost that, or Earth, Wind and Fire, Body Dancing in September, Body what is, the one of the outside songwriters was like, well, we've got to replace Body with something that actually makes sense. And Maurice White was like, no, I like it. It sings well.
Those placeholder lyrics become the real ones once you get used to it.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, not that what Robert wrote was nonsensical, but it was literally just like you say, a song about writing a song and a reference to the time of day. A lot of people are disappointed when they find out that that's what it is, because they want something deeper. But
well, thanks for clarifying that. I mean, based on what he's talking about, you can tell it's about the time of day. So, but what always made my brain hurt was I thought it was like, 6 to 4. I'd be like, wait a minute, that's like 22, not 25 hours. Like, you know what I mean? I was trying to do the math, and I'm sure it made a lot of people's heads hurt. So thanks. It's 25 or 26 minutes to 4. Thank you for clarifying. Cool. Saturday in the Park. That was always a little kind of a bouncy, but catchy one. But why do you think that one was such a hit?
Again, I Robert just had a knack for coming up with sort of hooky. I've always told him, you do your best work when you just sit down at the piano and just start banging around. And that's sort of the way he, Saturday was. He had a little room where he wrote, and he sat down at the piano and a tape recorder, and he, that riff came out, and so that's sort of how the genesis of that song was. And I think he was still living in New York, and probably was looking out his window at Central Park, and there came that song. And trying to remember what the Motown tune was. There's a tune that even he admits that he loosely based kind of the feel of that song on. I think it might have been Mustang Sally. And if you think about the feel of the rhythm section in Mustang Sally, alongside of Saturday in the Park, they're not similar songs, but just the kind of the groove. So he was going for something that was potentially, again, going to make people want to get up and kind of dance and clap their hands. And we see that every night.
Love it. It's a cool song. All right. And then the ultimate, apology song. Hard to say I'm sorry. Is there a better apology song ever?
Probably not. I mean, that's a good one. That was a Cetera David Foster thing. And, that was the song literally that put essentially another era onto the career of Chicago. The band suffered Terry Kath's death in 1977. 77, or was it January? Was it 78? I should know that. But then, they made a couple records in the middle there after Guercio departed producing the band, and after Terry passed away, and they didn't really have a lot of commercial success. And then 1981, I guess it was, entered David Foster, who was coming off of what had he done? He'd done a couple things for the Tubes. He'd produced Bill Champlin's solo stuff. And they went in the studio, and him and Cetera hit it off, and they wrote that song, and it became, I guess, a #1 single, and launched basically the 80s era of Chicago, which also, of course, included You're the Inspiration, Hard Habit to Break, Along Comes a Woman, Stay the Night, Love Me Tomorrow. So it's kind of cool, we kind of have, it's literally like there's the 70s era and the 80s era. that we can draw upon for hit songs, which is kind of cool.
Oh,
You know?
absolutely. And I remember, and it's funny, you mentioned those 70s and 80s eras, but then come the 90s, which full disclosure, when I when I was growing up, they brought back Hard to Say I'm Sorry. I think Babyface remixed it for As Yet as an R&B tune, and Cetera I think was like, I think David Foster might have put Cetera on like a remix or something, but
Yeah.
so those songs are timeless. But you mentioned a couple of them, but tell me about You're the Inspiration too. Tell me about, if Hard to Say I'm Sorry is like the ultimate apology song. You're the Inspiration is like the ultimate, like, I love you. Here's why I love you song. You're the inspiration, but why do you think it works so well?
Well, you want to know the truth behind You're the Inspiration was Kenny Rogers was actually making a record, and and Peter and David Foster got together and said, hey, do you want to try to write a tune for Kenny Rogers' new record? So they went in the studio and they wrote You're the Inspiration, and Cetera sang it, and they sent it to Kenny Rogers, who declined to record the song.
Come on,
He said,
Kenny. I'll be like Kramer, Kenny.
I know. So he was like, yeah, he didn't want the tune. And so basically what's on the record uh is essentially the demo that they cut to present to Kenny Rogers.
Wow.
And it wound up on the Chicago album, and it wound up being a huge hit. So they were right about the song, and Kenny missed out on one there. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a very straight up, love song.
I wonder if
But
Kenny Rogers was ever kicking himself that watching Chicago climb the charts with that one.
I
Uh,
think he did okay.
I think he was all right. Rest in peace, gambler. All right, maybe time for one more. Will You Still Love Me? That one always comes to mind of hearing it constantly on the radio, growing up in the 80s as well. But any good fun stories on the making of Will You Still Love Me?
Well, I mean, the only fun story about Will You Still Love Me would be that that was obviously that was the first hit post Peter Cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the first thing they released off of Chicago 18, which was the record they did with David Foster, but with Jason Sheff on vocals instead of Peter, the first thing they released was a remake of 25 or 6 to 4. And and the reception to that was not great because, sometimes if it ain't broke, you don't fix it. 25 or 6 to 4 is such a classic song, and the record is so well known that people didn't really want to hear it. So that kind of went away. And then they released Will You Still Love Me? And I believe, I don't remember what chart. I don't think it went to number 3, maybe, on the pop charts.
I'm seeing whatever list I have, which who knows, but if it's right, but it says number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. Yeah.
Well, there you go. Then I did know my history.
Impressive.
But the interesting thing about it was, so simultaneous with Chicago releasing or recording their record, Peter Cetera was over doing his first solo album, right? And and according to Jason, David Foster, their producer, got a hold of a mix, a rough mix of "The Glory of Love," which was going to be Cetera's first single.
Right.
So he came into the studio and played it for the guys and says, "This is what we've got to beat," and played them "The Glory of Love," and they all looked at each other and went, "Whoa." This is going to be a huge hit. And it was a number 1 record. It was, so Will You Still Love Me was kind of their response to Glory of Love. And, both songs were huge and both did really well. And so, it was all good in the hood. at that point. But yeah, I don't remember. I can't remember the songwriters on that. They were, I think they were both outside writers on "Will You Still Love Me." If I'm not mistaken.
It says David Foster, Tom Keene, and Richard Baskin. But yes,
Uh,
you're right. Notable for Cetera leaving, and then Jason Scheff as lead vocals. Yeah.
yep. I remember when I bought. At the time, I was living in Richmond, Virginia, and I remember when Tara left, and I was kind of like, oh boy, this is huge. Um, and I went out and I bought Chicago 18 on vinyl, and I brought it home, and I put the record on, and I think the first song on the record is a song called Niagara Falls. And I heard Jason's voice on there, and he had this really high tenor, very present tenor voice, and I went, wow, I think they're going to be okay. It sounds like they found a guy, and so it's kind of cool.
I just think it's cool that unlike other bands, that they kept naming it, Chicago 18. I mean, I guess you had like, Led Zeppelin 4, there's some precedent, but, instead of actual album titles, I thought it's always cool that they just kept it going, Chicago with the numeric. I think that's special. Cool. Well, I mean, that sort of brings us to present day then. So then you join them in 95, and I guess let's end there. How did you get the call to actually join them? Like, were you pinching yourself?
Well, I didn't get the call. So I've told this story probably a million times, so I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version a little bit. But
thank you for 1,000,001 right here.
It's kind of a long story. But so I was living in LA, and I had done a year with Rick Springfield, and I had worked with a jazz saxophonist named Warren Hill, and I was in Olivia Newton-John's band for about a week, but she was diagnosed with breast cancer and had to cancel her tour. So I was basically kind of sitting home out of work. I'd done a few things, but I was essentially unemployed, and I was looking for work. And so I started making phone calls. One of the phone calls I made was to a friend of mine named Dave Friedman, who at the time was an amplifier repair guy, and his shop was inside of a rehearsal studio in North Hollywood called Third Encore. And I said, Dave, if you ever hear, most bands audition musicians in a rehearsal studio. So, and he worked in one, and I said, well, if you ever hear of anybody looking for anybody, I'm looking for a gig. And I got a phone call from him about a month later, and he said, hey, Chicago is down here auditioning guitar players today. And I went, today? Couldn't you given me a little more advance warning? And he's like, I just found out about it. And I was like, whoa. So I tried to call their management, and they basically blew me off, said, we got 8 guys we're listening to. It's a closed audition. Sorry. And so I was sitting in my house drinking a cup of coffee, and I was, what am I going to do now? I was like, that would be the perfect gig for me, but how can I get them to listen to me? I threw all my gear in my car, and I drove down to Third Encore, and I parked in the parking lot, and I just essentially waited for the guys to show up. They weren't there yet. And one by one, I saw the guys walk into the rehearsal studio, and I was like, I can't talk to Robert Lamb. I can't talk to Jimmy Pankow. I can't talk to Walt Parazater. I can't talk to Lee Locknane. They're going to just tell me to go home, kid, and I don't know those guys. And the rest of the guys, Champlin walked in, and Triss walked in, and the last guy to show up, and I found out later that was always the case, was Jason Scheff. And I had actually met Jason once. He had poked his head into a rehearsal studio where I was playing with a kind of an original band project, and he knew the drummer. And I had actually said to him, I was like, wow, man, great to meet you. I love Chicago. If you guys ever need a guitar player, I'm your guy, kind of jokingly, right? Not knowing that later on they'd be looking for somebody. So when Jason got out of his car, I jumped out of my car and went over and said, hey, man, do you remember me? I was in that band with Sergio, your buddy who was playing drums. And he kind of was like, not really. And I was like, it was like 3 or 4 months ago. You don't remember? And he goes, well, maybe. And I said, man, I'd really like an opportunity to audition. And he said, well, give me your number. Let me see what I can do. And I guess he thought about it. And he wound up calling me. And he had talked the guys into extending an extra day to listen to me. And so I went down. I played 6 songs. Last one was 25 or 6 to 4. As soon as the song ended, the band called a band meeting out in the hallway and left me in the room alone. And they came back in and they offered me the gig. So that's how that happened. I almost, hung up the phone and poured another cup of coffee and waited for the next opportunity. But I just thought, man, I can't let this pass me by. I'm going to have to have to go outside my comfort zone a little bit, and try to will this to happen. And it did. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to
it. Well, you made Silver Spring proud for sure. And, and coming full circle with Merriweather and all the local connections, you made us proud, sir. Cool. Well, thanks so much for joining us. You've been really generous with your time. Wait, actually, real quick. So when the band goes in the Rock Hall of Fame in 2016, then you've been playing with them for like over a decade or even almost 2 at that point.
close to
2 decades, 21 years or something at that point. So how does that work? Like, so they obviously, I guess they just induct, the standard is they induct the original members, but then you're like, hey guys, like I've been here for 20 years. Where don't I get to go up on stage?
Well, that's always been a bone of contention with a lot of bands going into the Rock Hall because, right. Even Jason Scheff, who was with the group for 30 years and actually had several hit songs with the group, wasn't inducted.
Right.
They're very much about the original band members that created the original music in the early stages of a band's formation getting inducted. Haven't seen too many. I believe Michael McDonald got inducted with the Doobie Brothers. I guess they deemed that his impact was significant enough to warrant that. But
you don't see like a Sammy Hagar with Van Halen kind of a deal.
Well, yes.
Or did he go in with them? No, I don't think he did.
He didn't? I'm
not sure. I don't know. That's a good question.
I don't know. He should have. I mean, they were more successful with Sammy than Dave.
I'm looking it up right now in real time during this interview. Yes, no, you are right. He did go in with them as well. Yep, he did.
So it was Sammy, Dave, Eddie, Alex, and Michael. And that's it. Yeah.
It was Sammy, Eddie, David Lee Roth, Michael Anthony, and Alex Van Halen. Yep.
Right.
So now we're getting into the weeds on something that, like, just this morning, Todd Rundgren was like, yeah, I'm going in, but I don't care. It's all about the music. And here we go deep into the woods on on another band. But I think it's fun talking music.
Yeah. The Rock Hall is kind of a thing that, a lot of artists have mixed feelings about it. Some have sort of reluctantly gone in and some gladly accepted the honor. Just based on those kind of things alone. Like I know a couple of bands felt really, like they had members in their groups that were in their band for like 40 years, but those guys weren't inducted. And they're kind of like, really? This guy is just as important as, Bob, who was in the band for 3 years, but you want to put Bob in because he was in the original lineup, or whatever. I'm just being hypothetical, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
So it's kind of you know, it's kind of hit and miss there.
exactly. But either way, regardless of the accolades, it's really cool that Chicago has been around for so long and stuck around, and it's still fresh in everyone's minds with all the hits over all the years. And you've been a big part of that for the last several decades. So congrats on that. Thanks for doing Silver Spring Proud. And everyone, check out Chicago at MGM National Harbor on October 8th. Hey, thanks for doing this. This was a blast.
Hey, man, no problem. I appreciate you having me, Jason.
Thanks so much for joining us on Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Remember to hit the subscribe button and give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time. I wanted to take a second to tell you about an app I really enjoy. Living in the DC area is great, and Podcast DC gathers all of the local shows that I like all in one local app. Health, sports, local news, politics, and so much more. Podcast DC is the new local app with hundreds of DC area podcasts to choose from. I can earn exciting rewards just for listening and share the podcasts I love instantly. Available in the App Store or in Google Play, listen local with Podcast DC.